and welcome. My name is Alan, and today we are back with more Greek mythology. So, yeah, we're finally catching back up to date on the main channel here, so. So, hopefully, I should be able to get us all back on track again. Now that all the cataract stuff's done and everything. But with that said, let's jump into this. Last episode we dealt with Demeter and her and the disappearance of her daughter Persephone. This episode we start Dionysus or Bacchus. The story is very differently told from this story is very differently told from the story of Demeter. Dionysus was the last god to enter Olympus. Homer did not admit him. There are no early sources for his story except a few brief allusions in Hesiod in the 8th and 9th century. A last Homeric hymn, perhaps even as late as the 4th century, gives the only account of the pirate ship, and the fate of Pentheus is the subject of the last play of Euripides in the 5th century, the most modern of all Greek poets. Thebes was Dionysus's own city, where he was born, the son of Zeus and the Theban princess Semele. He was the only god whose parents were not both divine. At Thebes alone do mortal women bear immortal gods. Semele was the most unfortunate woman of all those Zeus fell in love with, and in her case, too, the reason was Hera. Zeus was madly in love with her and told her that anything she asked of him he would do. He swore it by the river Styx, the oath which not even he himself could break. She told him that what she wanted above all else was to see him in his full splendor as King of Heaven, the Lord of the Thunderbolt. It was Hera who had put that wish into her heart. Zeus knew that no mortal could behold him thus and live, but he could do nothing. He was sworn by the Styx. He came as she had asked, and before that awful glory of burning light, she died. But Zeus snatched from her her child that was near birth, and hid it in his own side, away from Hera, until the time had come for it to be born. Then Hermes carried it to be cared for by the nymphs of Nyssa, the loveliest of Earth's valleys. But no man has ever looked upon Nyssa or knows where it lies. Some say the nymphs were the Hyades from Zeus, afterwards placed in the sky as stars, the stars which bring rain when they near the horizon. To the god of the vine the god of the vine was born of fire and nursed by rain, the hard burning heat that ripens the grapes and the water that keeps the plant alive. Grown to manhood, Dionysus wandered far to strange places. The lands of Lydia, rich in gold, of Phrygia, too, the sun-struck plains, of Persia, the great walls of Bactria, the storm-swept country of Medes, and Araby the blessed. Everywhere he taught men the culture of the vine and the mysteries of his worship, and everywhere they accepted him as a god until he drew near to his own country. One day over the sea near Greece, a pirate ship came sailing. On a great headland by the shore they saw a beautiful youth. His rich dark hair flowed down over a purple cloak that covered his strong shoulders. He looked like a son of kings, one of whose parents could pay a great ransom. Exulting, the sailors sprang ashore and seized him. On board the ship, they fetched rude bonds to fetter him with. But, to their amazement, they were unable to bind him. The ropes would not hold together. They fell apart when they touched his hands or feet, and he sat looking at them with a smile in his dark eyes. Alone among the helmsmen understood and cried out that this must be a god and should be set free at once, or deadly harm could come to them. But the captain mocked him for a silly fool and bade the crew hasten to hoist the sail. The wind filled it, and the men drew taut the sheets, but the ship did not move. Then wonder upon wonder happened. Fragrant wine ran in streams down the deck. The vine with many clusters spread out over the sail. A dark green ivy plant twined around the mast like a garland with flowers in it and lovely fruits. Terror-stricken, the pirates ordered the helmsman to put in to land. Too late, for as they spoke, their captive became a lion, roaring and glaring terribly. At that, they leaped overboard and instantly were changed into dolphins, all except the good helmsman. On him the god had mercy. He held him back and bade him take courage, for he had found favor with one who was indeed a god, Dionysus, whom Semele bore in union with Zeus. When he passed through Thrace on his way to Greece, the god was insulted by one of the kings there, Lycurgus, who bitterly opposed this new worship. Dionysus retreated before him and even took refuge from him in the depths of the sea. But later he came back, overpowered him, and punished him for his wickedness, though mildly, by imprisoning him within a rocky cave until his first fierce maddening rage passed slowly and he learned to know the god whom he had mocked. But the other gods were not mild. Zeus struck Lycurgus blind, and he died soon after. None lived long who strove with gods. Sometime during the wanderings, Dionysus came upon the princess of Crete, Ariadne. when she was utterly desolate, having been abandoned on the shore of the island of Naxos by the Athenian prince Theseus, whose life she had saved. Dionysus had compassion upon her. He rescued her and in the end loved her. When she died, Dionysus took a crown he had given her and placed it among the stars. The mother whom he had never seen was not forgotten. He longed for her so greatly that at last he dared the terrible descent to the lower world to seek her. When he found her, he defied the power of death to keep her from him, and death yielded. Dionysus brought her away, but not to live on earth. He took her up to Olympus, where the gods consented to receive her as one of themselves. A mortal indeed, but the mother of a god, and therefore fit to dwell with immortals. The god of wine could be kind and beneficent. He could also be cruel and drive men on to frightful deeds. Often he made them mad. The Maenads, or Bacchantes, as they were also called, were women frenzied with wine. They rushed through woods and over mountains, uttering sharp cries, waving pine cone tipped wands, swept away in a fierce ecstasy. Nothing could stop them. They would tear to pieces the wild creatures they met and devour the bloody shreds of flesh. They sang, "Oh, sweet upon the mountain, the dancing and the singing, the maddening rushing flight. Oh, sweet to sink to earth outworn, when the wild goat has been hunted and caught. Oh, the joy of the blood and the raw red flesh." The gods of Olympus loved order and beauty in their sacrifices and their temples. The mad women who, Maenads, had no temple, they went to the wilderness to worship, to the wildest mountains, the deepest forest, as if they kept to the customs of an ancient time before men had thought of building houses for their gods. They went out to the dusty, crowded city, back to the lean purity of the untrodden hills and woodlands. There Dionysus gave them food and drink, herbs and berries, and the milk of the wild goat. Their beds were on the soft meadow grass, under the thick-leaved trees, where the pine needles fall year after year. They woke to a sense of peace and heavenly freshness. They bathed in a clear brook. There was much that was lovely, good, and freeing in this worship under the open sky and the ecstasy of joy it brought in the wild beauty of the world. And yet, always present too, was the horrible bloody feast. The worship of Dionysus was centered in these two ideas so far apart, of freedom and ecstatic joy and of savage brutality. The god of wine could give either to his worshippers. Throughout the story of his life, he is sometimes man's blessing, sometimes his ruin. Of all the terrible deeds laid to his account, the worst was done in Thebes. his mother's city. Dionysus came to Thebes to establish his worship there. He was accompanied, as was his custom, by a train of women dancing and singing exultant songs, wearing fawn skins over their robes, waving ivy-wreathed wands. They seemed mad with joy. They sang, "O Bacchanals, come, oh come, sing Dionysus, sing to the timbrel, the deep-voiced timbrel, joyfully praise him, him who brings joy, holy, all holy, music is his calling, to the hills, fly, O Bacchanal, swift of foot, on, O joyful, be fleet." Pentheus, the king of Thebes, was the son of Semele's sister, but he had no idea that the leader of this band of excited, strange-acting women was his own cousin. He did not know that when Semele died, Zeus had saved her child. The wild dancing and the loud joyous singing and the generally queer behavior of these strangers seemed to him highly objectionable and to be stopped at once. Pentheus ordered his guards to seize and imprison the visitors, especially the leader, whose face is flushed with wine, a cheating sorcerer from Lydia. But as he said these words, he heard behind him a solemn warning. "The man you reject is a new god. He is Semele's child, from Zeus rescued. He with divine Demeter is greatest upon earth for men." The speaker was the old blind prophet Dionysus, the holy man of Thebes, who knew as no one else the will of the gods. But as Pentheus turned to answer him, he saw that he was tricked out like a wild woman. A wreath of ivy on his white hair, his old shoulders covered by fawn skin, a queer pine-topped stick in his trembling hand. Pentheus laughed mockingly as he looked over him and then ordered him with contempt out of his sight. Thus he brought upon himself his doom. He would not hear when the gods spoke to him. Dionysus was led in before him by a band of his soldiers. They said he had not tried to flee or to resist, but had done all possible to make it easy for them to seize and bring him, until they felt ashamed and told him they were acting under orders, not of their own free will. They declared, too, that the maidens they had imprisoned had all escaped to the mountains. The fetters would not keep fastened, the door unbarred themselves. "This man," they said, "has come to Thebes with many wonders." Pentheus by now was blind to everything except his anger and his scorn. He spoke roughly to Dionysus, who answered him with entire gentleness, seeming to try to reach his real self and open his eyes to see that he was face to face with divinity. He warned him that he could not keep him in prison, "For God will set me free." "God?" Pentheus asked jeeringly. "Yes," Dionysus answered. He is here and sees my suffering, not where my eyes can see him, Pentheus said. He is where I am, answered Dionysus. You cannot see him, for you are not pure. Pentheus angrily ordered the soldiers to bind him and take him to the prison, and Dionysus went, saying, The wrongs you do to me are wrongs done to the gods. But the prison could not hold Dionysus. He came forth, and going to Pentheus again, he tried to persuade him to yield to what these wonders plainly showed as divine, and welcome this new worship of a new and great God. When, however, Pentheus only heaped insults and threats upon him, Dionysus left him to his doom. It was the most horrible that others could be. Pentheus went to pursue the gods' followers among the hills where the maidens had fled when they escaped from prison. Many of the Theban women had joined them. Pentheus's mother and her sisters were there. And there Dionysus showed himself in his most terrible aspect. He made them all mad. The women thought Pentheus a wild beast, a mountain lion, and they rushed to destroy him, his mother first. As they fell upon him, he knew at last that he had fought against a god and must pay with his life. They tore him limb from limb, and then, only then, the god restored their senses, and his mother saw what she had done. Looking at her in her agony, the maidens, all sobered now, the dancing over and the singing and the wild wand waving, said to one another, In strange ways hard to know gods come to men. Many a thing past hope they had fulfilled, and what was looked for went another way. A path we never thought to tread, God found for us. So has this come to pass. The ideas about Dionysus in these various stories seem at first contradictory. In one, he is the joy god, he whose locks are bound with gold, ruddy Bacchus, comrade of the Maeonids, who blithe torch blazes. In another, he is the heartless god, savage, brutal, he who with a mocking laugh taunts his prey, snares and drags him to his death with his bacchanals. The truth is, however, that both ideas arose quite simply and reasonably from the fact of his being the god of wine. Wine is bad as well as good. It cheers and warms men's hearts. It also makes them drunk. The Greeks were a people who saw facts very clearly. They could not shut their eyes to the ugly and degrading side of wine drinking and see only the delightful side. Dionysus was the god of the vine. Therefore, he was a power which sometimes made men commit frightful and atrocious crimes. No one could defend them. No one would ever try to defend the fate Pentheus suffered. But the Greeks said to each other, such things really do happen when people are frenzied with drink. The truth did not blind them to the other truth, that wine was the merrymaker, lighting men's hearts, bringing careless ease and fun and gaiety. The wine of Dionysus, when the weary cares of men leave every heart, we travel to a land that never was. The poor grow rich and the rich grow great of heart. All conquering are the shafts made from the vine. The reason that Dionysus was so different at one time from another was because of this double nature of wine, and so the god of the vine. He was man's benefactor, and he was man's destroyer. On his beneficent side, he was not only the god that makes men merry. His cup was life-giving, healing every ill. Under his indulgence, courage was quickened and fear vanished, at any rate for the moment. He uplifted his worshippers. He made them feel that they could do what they had thought they could not. All this happy freedom and confidence passed away, of course, as they either grew sober or got drunk. But while it lasted, it was like being possessed by a power greater than themselves. So people felt about Dionysus as about no other god. He was not only outside of them, he was within them. 2. They would be transformed by him into being like him. The momentary sense of exultant power wine drinking can give was only a sign to show men that they had within them more than they knew. They could themselves become divine. To think in this way was far removed from the old idea of worshiping the god by drinking enough to be gay, or to be freed from care, or to get drunk. There were followers of Dionysus who never drank wine at all. It is not known when the great change took place, lifting the god who freed men from a moment through drunkenness to the god who freed them through inspiration. But one very remarkable result of it made Dionysus for all future ages the most important of the gods of Greece. The Eleusinian mysteries, which were always chiefly Demeter's, had indeed great importance. For hundreds of years, they helped men, as Cicero said, to live with joy and to die with hope. But their influence did not last, very likely because nobody was allowed to teach their ideas openly or write about them. In the end, only a dim memory of them was left. It was quite otherwise with Dionysus. What was done at his great festival was open to all the world and is a living influence today. No other festival in Greece could compare with it. It took place in the spring when the vine begins to put forth its branches, and it lasted for 5 days. They were days of perfect peace and enjoyment. All the ordinary business of life stopped. No one could be put in prison. Prisoners were even released so that they could share in the general rejoicing. But the place where people gathered to do honor to the god was not a wild wilderness, made horrible by savage deeds in a bloody feast. It was not even a temple precinct with ordered sacrifices and priestly ceremonies. It was a theater, and the ceremony was the performance of a play, the greatest poetry in Greece, and among the greatest in the world, was written for Dionysus. The poets who wrote the plays, the actors and singers who took part in them, were all regarded as servants of the god. The performances were sacred. The spectators, too, along with the writers and the performers, were engaged in an act of worship. Dionysus himself was supposed to be present. His priest had the seat of honor. It is clear, therefore, that the idea of the god of holy inspiration who could fill men with his spirit to write gloriously and to act gloriously became far more important than the earlier ideas of him. In the first tragic plays, which are among the best there are, never equaled except by Shakespeare, were produced in the theater of Dionysus. Comedies were produced there too, but tragedies far outnumbered them, and there was a reason why. This strange god, the gay traveler, the cruel hunter and lofty inspirer, was also the sufferer. He, like Demeter, was afflicted not because of grief for another, as she was, but because of his own pain. He was the vine which is always pruned as nothing else that bears fruits. Every branch cut away, only the bare stalk left. Through the winter a dead thing to look at, an old gnarled stump, seeming incapable of ever pushing forth leaves again. Unlike Persephone, Dionysus died with the coming of the cold. Unlike her, his death was terrible. He was torn to pieces. In some stories by the Titans, in others by Hera's orders. He was always brought back to life. He died and rose again. It was his joyful resurrection they celebrated in the theater, but the idea of terrible deeds done to him and done by men under his influence was too closely associated with him ever to be forgotten. He was more than the suffering god. He was the tragic god. There was none other. He had still another side. He was the assurance that death does not end all. His worshippers believed that his death and resurrection showed that the soul lives on forever after the body dies. This faith was part of the mysteries of Eleusis. At first, it centered in Persephone, who also rose from the dead every spring. But as queen of the black underworld, she kept, even in the bright world above, a suggestion of something strange and awful. How could she, who carried always about her the reminder of death, stand for the resurrection, the conquest of death? Dionysus on the contrary, was never thought of as a power in the kingdom of the dead. There are many stories about Persephone in the lower world, only one about Dionysus. He rescued his mother from it. In his resurrection, he was the embodiment of the life that is stronger than death. He, and not Persephone, became the center of the belief in immortality. Around the year 80 AD, a great Greek writer, Plutarch, received news when he was far from home that a little daughter of his had died. A child of most gentle nature, he says. In his letter to his wife, he writes, "About that which you have heard, dear heart, that the soul once departed from the body vanishes and feels nothing. I know that you give no belief to such assertions because of those sacred and faithful promises given in the mysteries of Bacchus, which we who are of that religious brotherhood know. We hold it firmly for an undoubted truth that our soul is incorruptible and immortal. We are to think of the dead, that they pass into a better place and a happier condition. Let us behave ourselves accordingly, outwardly ordering our lives, while within all should be purer, wiser, incorruptible." So yeah, we'll go ahead and end that piece there. But yeah, so Dionysus, the joy of men and the agony of men. And the connection is very clear. You know, you get a warm feeling, you talk, you can be joyful if you're tipsy. As that effect wears off or turns into drunkenness, it becomes very different. So yeah, I mean, that connection there is very, very clear. He has to have his own cousin killed. He tries to help him, Pentheus, king of Thebes. Thebes, Thebes, not Thieves, Thieves. But yeah, and then of course we talk about him warning pirates on a pirate ship after he kind of shows them that, hey, I am a god. They flee, jump into the water, and he's like, y'all become dolphins. You'll live, but no longer as human. But he does spare the helmsman. So he shows, yes, I can be a beneficent, kind God. But I can also be very cruel. Yeah. And yet, he ended up at one point going into the underworld and rescuing his mortal mother, whom Zeus had as a lover and actually did love her until she became of age. Uh, or became of a certain age, because when things looked like she was going to die, he came and rescued um, the as of yet unborn Dionysus and put him in his own side. But yeah, it seems to be an interesting story. Another thing you'll notice, very Christianity allegory like. Dies, the resurrection, and he talks about God is in me. You wonder if at that point they weren't being somewhat influenced by the Christian literature of the day. So yeah, sorry, I was just squishing the bottle there. I'm completely missing the trash can. But yeah. You know, his father was deity, his mother was mortal. So yeah, a lot of Christian allegory. You wonder which side really influenced the other. But yeah, so it's a pretty good piece. I know it was a bit long, but it was all right. We'll be getting in to the official creation of the world, the gods. We got a quick overview earlier in the book, but now we're really going to get into the Titans and Gaia. Gaia. Also, if you understand how older English works, queer, gay was neither insults against LGBTQ people. You know, gay was essentially merry, happy, and thus gaiety, happiness. And then queer was just weird or unusual, was how the word was originally used. So yeah. But with that, as always, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. Someone tries to tell you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.